Hi, this is Morley, and this is the M-Wire. In case you didn't know, Israel has been under attack for a couple of days now. Now, I didn't really report anything on this simply because I thought it was an isolated incident, but we are well past that, folks. Literally over 1,000 rockets have been fired at Israel over the last 24 hours alone. The fact that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, are reporting that literally millions of people have taken to bomb shelters essentially tells you all you need to know as far as the severity of this. This is a major attack. This could very well escalate into a full-on war. Now, for those of you who haven't really been following this, I actually found an article that kind of gives a synopsis of all the events going on and whatnot and reactions from world leaders. Obviously, there's lots of stories involved with this, so instead of, covering, 10 different articles, this will essentially bring you up to speed, if you will, if you haven't been following all of the events. But it is a rapidly escalating situation, and it is very serious. Some of the things we're going to be going over is former U.S. diplomat warns of full-scale war, reports of further sirens attacks on Israel, U.S.-EU warns Israel on civilian casualties, at least 40 people have been killed so far, Israel's Shin Bet says at least 16 senior Hamas figures are killed, ICC fears war crimes may have taken place. Hamas has fired hundreds of rockets from Gaza. Germany says Israel has right to self-defense. Israel airstrikes destroyed a second tower at Gaza. I'm not really going to be showing clips of all the bombings and stuff. You can go to Twitter. That's all over Twitter if you want to check that out. I'm just going to be going over the issues as to what's really happening there right now. Ex-U.S. envoy of Israel warns of full-scale war. Daniel Kurtzer, a former U.S. ambassador to Israel and Egypt, told DW Layla Herrick that Israel and Palestine were on track for another war. We're in a mad rush to full-scale war, and it's war that neither Hamas or Israel really wants, he said. We've seen this movie before in 2014, and the war went on for almost 2 months with hundreds and hundreds of casualties. Times of Israel reports further strikes on Ashkelon. Emmanuel Fabian, a reporter with the Times of Israel newspaper, has tweeted pictures that he describes as the latest missile attacks on the Israeli city of Ashkelon. The EU is dismayed at civilian casualties. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell said he's dismayed at the large number of civilian deaths and injuries, including children, in latest Israel-Hamas fighting. He called the indiscriminate launching of rockets at Israel civilians unacceptable. U.S. warns Israel on civilian casualties. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken warned Israel on Wednesday to avoid civilian deaths while defending the Jewish state's right to attack Gaza in response to Hamas rocket fire. I think Israel has an extra burden in trying to do everything they possibly can to avoid civilian casualties, even if it's rightly responded in defense of its people, Washington's top diplomat said. France says world powers must avert fresh Middle East conflict. World powers must do all they can in new conflict between Israel and Palestinians, according to France's foreign minister. The cycle of violence in Gaza and Jerusalem, but also the West Bank and several cities in Israel, risks leading to major escalation. Yves Le Drian told Parliament, everything must be done to avoid a conflict. Russia urges Israel to cease settlement building. Sergei Vereshchin, a Russian deputy foreign minister, called on Israel on Wednesday to immediately stop all settlement activities in Palestinian territories. The IRA news agency told Vereshchin as saying that the status quo of Jerusalem's sacred cities must be respected. Energy giant shuts natural gas platform amid fighting. The Israeli government told Chevron energy giant to shut down the Tamar natural gas platform off the coast of Ashkelon, the firm said in a statement. In accordance with instructions from the Ministry of Energy, we have shut in and depressured the Tamar platform, Chevron said in a statement. Israel insisted that the energy needs would continue to be met. Turkey tells Russia that Israel needs a lesson. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said the Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin that powers need to give Israel a strong and deterrent lesson. According to a statement released by the Turkish presidency, Erdogan has also proposed that an international protection force to help the Palestinians be considered. A separate readout by the Kremlin said that serious concern was expressing about the continuing clashes and growing number of people killed and wounded. Germany says Israel has a right to self-defense. Chancellor Angela Merkel, Stefan Seibert, and Berlin condemns the incessant rocket attacks from the Gaza Strip against Israeli cities in the strongest terms. They added they could not be justified. Israel has the right to self-defense against these attacks, he added. Israel says it has killed 16 Hamas figures. The Shin Bet, the Israeli security service, says that forces killed 16 senior Hamas figures with an airstrike on Wednesday. Hamas has not commented on the Israeli statement. Officials said on the dead are Bassem Issa, a veteran Hamas brigade commander of the Gaza City, Hamas cyber and missile technology chief Joe Matala, and 13 members of the faction's weapons manufacturing staff. Ex-Knesset speaker, both Netanyahu and Hamas are legitimate. Abraham Berg, former Speaker of the Israeli Knesset and ex-interim President of Israel, has spoken to DW of what led to the current situation and why there is no obvious way out of the crisis. There are no proportions in wars, he said. War is an unproportional measure and the situation is not to be judged immediately. In what led to actually an interesting joint motivation, a common denominator between Hamas and Netanyahu's conservative government, both do not want to give power to the Palestinian Authority to make peace with it. The Hamas wants to take over the Palestinian Authority, Berg continued, and promote its religious and political agenda. And Netanyahu does not want to compromise, sit down, and have reconciliation with Palestinian Authority because it will lead to eventually a Palestinian state. And regarding the ongoing violence, Berg said, every citizen to be a citizen in Gaza or Jerusalem has the right to live in peace. Netanyahu hold on to power has been hanging on by a thread as of late as he struggles to form a government, and Berg says this means he has no position to lead Israel into conflict. Netanyahu 4 times in the last year and a half, the majority of the Israelis said, we do not want you as a prime minister. Both the Israeli right-wing government and Hamas religious government are illegitimate forces. Netanyahu, Hamas will pay a very heavy price. There appears to be no imminent end to the violence as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that militants would pay a very heavy price for their actions. We are at the height of a weighty campaign, Netanyahu said in televised remarks alongside his defense minister and military chief. Hamas and Islamic Jihad paid and will pay a very heavy price for their belligerence. Their blood is forfeit. Netanyahu's words come from UN Special Coordinator in the Middle East process Tor Westenland, warned of possible full-scale war if there isn't an immediate cessation of the violence. Prime Minister Johnson urges restraint from both sides. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson had urged Israelis and Palestinians to step back from the brink as he called on both sides to show restraint. The UK is deeply concerned by the growing violence and civilian casualties, and we want to see an urgent de-escalation of tensions, Johnson said on Twitter. Johnson's message comes from a heavy night of shelling in the Gaza resulted in the deaths of at least 35 people, fueling fears into a descent in full-scale war. ICC talks of possible crimes. The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has voiced great concern over the escalation of violence in the region and suggested crimes may have been committed. I note that with great concern the escalation of violence in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, as well as in around Gaza, the possible commission of crimes under the Rome Statute, Fatou Bensouda said on Twitter. The Rome Statute, which was founded by the ICC, contains 4 core international crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression, noting that all these crimes shall not be subject to any statute of limitations. Death toll increases after intensive barrage of rockets. DW's Jerusalem correspondent Tanya Kramer spoke of another night of intensive airstrikes as the Israeli army said there had been over 1,000 rockets fired from Gaza towards Israel since Monday. Kramer confirmed that many of the details regarding the overnight barrage. She told DW television Israeli armed forces launched attacks towards Gaza in the past hours. She said the attacks were targeting mainly government buildings and police stations and intelligence stations. We also understand there was a targeted strike on Hamas intelligence leaders, so that the latest figures from Gaza and from the Ministry of Health, 35 people were killed, among them children. She also spoke of the strikes incoming that opposed direction. Since the early morning on Wednesday, very heavy rocket barrages from Gaza towards central Israel, including Tel Aviv and the international airport, and 2 people were killed in the city of Lod. And the protests which began on Saturday showed no signs of letting up either, Kramer added. We have also seen overnight demonstrations in the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem, also in Palestinian communities overnight. Well, folks, things have obviously gotten way hot in the Middle East. I know there's usually, some rockets coming from Gaza and whatnot, but this is a whole different animal. Now, I want you to think about something. Could all of this simply be a distraction for what's happening in a certain county in Arizona right now? You never know. Thank you for coming along with me into my video. Please remember to like, comment, share, and of course, subscribe. God bless.